Hey everybody, chapter 15, lesson 3, and as we saw at the end of lesson 2, Kennedy got shot, he was killed, right? So the vice president at the time, a guy named LBJ, is going to be sworn in on the Oval Office, and LBJ is going to become the next president of the United States. Here he is getting sworn in on Air Force One, right after the assassination of Kennedy, after he was declared dead. This is actually Jackie Kennedy, that's Kennedy's wife. So her husband had just been shot, and here he is getting signed in as the oath of office to become president of the United States. And the questions are the same. How is Kennedy going to change American society, and can governments fix society's problems? And Johnson's going to continue Kennedy's programs.
Good morning, Northeastern. Today is cycle day.
He's going to look for ways to improve society and maybe get done some of the things that Kennedy wasn't able to get done. And how is he going to be able to do that? The trick there is going to be doing something called building consensus. See, President Johnson, his leadership style was described by a lot of different people as kind of overpowering and intimidating. And he was a big dude, well over 6 foot, like 6'4", and he was loud, authoritative, and he would just kind of, get right in there, and he would use that to get what he wanted. So like here he is talking to one senator or another about some particular plan or policy program that he wanted to get done, and you can see him like totally using his body and his authority to be intimidating. And there are some stories that we might share in class with you to talk about some of the crazy ways that this guy would be intimidating, because he wants to end poverty in America. This guy knows what poverty is like. Johnson grew up dirt poor. He's one of the last few truly like dirt poor Americans that we've ever had rise to be president. And he hated poverty. He despised it. It was a motivating factor in his life. He thought people would mock him his entire life because he grew up poor. So he wants to abolish poverty. He's going to, in fact, in 1964, a couple of months after Kennedy is dead, declare a war on poverty. He encourages Congress to pass something called the Economic Opportunity Act. And the goal of this act was to look at all of those services in America, whether it was in Appalachia where things were really tough or in cities, and attack those inadequate public services. And also attack what he saw as causes of unemployment, like illiteracy, and other things that were causes of poverty. Unemployment in general, a cause of poverty. This Act of 1964, the Economic Opportunity Act, it creates the Office of Economic Opportunity, and that's a major part of Johnson's war on poverty, because it's going to coordinate all the different services organized by the government in order to put an end to poverty, or at least put a dent in it. I'll give you an example of two offices or two programs that this Office of Economic Opportunity oversaw, both of which are still in existence today. Most of the things in Johnson's war on poverty, by the way, are still around today to find ways to help the impoverished. The first is the Job Corps, and it's a really cool program for young people, 16 to 25, to get job skills and to then, find a way into the workforce. Like, so here's an example of a recent graduating class of culinary students who liked culinary arts, wanted to get a job, they were unemployed, enjoyed the culinary arts, and here they are graduating with help of the Job Corps. Another one that's still around for people to take a look at is something that was called Volunteers in Service to America. It was VISTA back in the day. We call it AmeriCorps now, but it's still around, and it says, you know what, why... Kennedy had the Peace Corps, right, where he sends people overseas to help other countries. Why don't we help countries here at home? Because those are the people that really need our help, right here in America, in our neighborhoods, in our rural areas, where we have our own poor people. And so we have volunteers that work in all these different places. And these volunteers today make a tremendous difference. One volunteer, on average, in 1 year, right, 27 kids get tutored, 890 hours of service, 31 volunteers recruited to help out in a community, $8,000 raised. And all of those things cost the federal government just $10,000. And you can do that too. You can volunteer to join AmeriCorps after school to help out the poor in our country. And when the people looked at Johnson and his efforts to help the poor, it resonated. people supported him, and he won re-election in 1964 against the Republican candidate, a guy named Barry Goldwater. And once Johnson gets in for his own first term from 64 to the end of 1968, early 1969, he's going to make some changes of his own. And those changes that he's going to make are going to include taking America from a society that has a war on poverty to becoming a truly great society. In fact, he gives a speech in early 1964, and he says that what he learned from talking with all of the poor people in America that he talked to, from his own experience growing up dirt poor, what he learned is that we need more to become a great society. Our government can do more to help become great, that it's not just something that's in the way. Government can help us become a great society. He wants to go beyond just getting rid of poverty. It was this vision that Johnson had of a more perfect and equitable society in the United States that we should become, that we should want to become. So he encouraged the government, and he had a number of different laws that he proposed that were passed to find ways to make government more perfect and equitable. I'll give you some examples. Two really significant programs that are still around is Medicare, health care for senior citizens. That's a big deal, right? Because so many people had been trying to do that. FDR tried to do it, Truman tried to do it, Kennedy was trying to do it, and none of them could get it done. But Johnson's able to get that done with his ability to build consensus. He introduces Medicaid, which is health care for the poor. Both of those are still around, and Medicaid just got bigger to cover more people. Head Start, another program that's still around, which is directed at disadvantaged preschoolers, gets thousands and thousands of impoverished kids into preschool. And we know how important that can be when we looked at that poverty data just the other day about how much at a disadvantaged poor kids are when it comes even to just understanding the English language by the time they get to kindergarten. He creates the Department of Housing and Urban Development to tackle some of those problems. A new cabinet agency that he created during his administration to tackle things like transportation and healthcare and housing and policing in cities, because we know that cities were suffering. Remember, we talked about how Americans were moving to the suburbs and cities were suffering? He says the Department of Housing and Urban Development as a cabinet agency that he created can help solve that problem. He goes after nativism. He targets people who are anti-immigrant. And he says, you know, what we really need is a new immigration act, which makes America more inclusive. It makes us stronger. And this act creates really long-term changes in the demographics, the makeup of our American population. Immigrants from all over the world start to come to America. And you begin to see this change. I mean, check it out, right? Here in 1965 is when we see that law passed. And by 1970, the number of immigrants coming to our country continues to rise, up to an approximation of by millions out in the years to come. It's going to permanently change the face of American society and make us a more inclusive place. He's going to get two laws passed to help with civil rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we're going to talk more about those in detail, but those are really big laws that are passed to finally put an end to, or at least begin to put an end to discrimination by the government against African Americans. And when you add all of this together and you look at this great society and you kind of combine all of it and you smush it together, what we see is a mixed bag. It's hard to judge the impact of the Great Society because these programs are new and they grow really fast, and they're hard to evaluate. I mean, because some of these programs, like how do you measure whether or not that it's working? But what we can do, and what we do know, is that these programs do provide the poor with really crucial services. And we also know, if we take a look at the poverty rate, the percentages of Americans in poverty, here it is, right about when Johnson starts his Great Society initiatives, and here it is on the other side. We have a smaller percentage of Americans in poverty in the present day than we did back in 1964 when Johnson starts his Great Society and his war on poverty. So, while they're hard to judge, you can see that there is some sort of benefit, at least to some of them. And I think that's a quick and easy summary of all of this, and we'll do much more with this in class tomorrow.